TotalView. TotalView is a great kind of place to get started with things. And if you've ever kind of logged into Silent Push, or if you're new to Silent Push, um, maybe this looks a little different to you. We did update some of the interface as part of our latest release, but one of the easiest ways that you can actually go ahead and get started is kind of just working off of the idea of I either have a domain or I have an IP that I want to start working with. In this case, what I want to do is I want to just grab, let's just say I want to grab a domain, montblancgroup.cfd, which a lot of these new TLDs that are about $1 to register, we probably assume that they are already kind of sketchy or doing something that they shouldn't be. But let's investigate. One of the things you'll see also is there's a little bit of a context menu here. So given that it's a domain, maybe you want to kind of jump into certain parts of the data first. Subdomains, certificates, scan data, screenshots, who is data. You can kind of scroll through and see the list here, but the easiest way is just I want to click search. I want to bring up TotalView for a given domain. Now, there's a bunch of fun things in here. Maybe you've seen them before. Maybe you haven't noticed them. Maybe you've seen them and you say, I really just want to know kind of what these things are. Why do I care about some of these fields? Because there's a lot of different pivots we can use to kind of start out in TotalView. So I have my my Montblanc CFD here, or montblancgroup.cfd here. Right at the top, we have some highlights. So one of the things you'll see is this PADNS referenced a lot. This is just our term. PADNS is passive aggressive DNS. So again, we're doing all of that forcible re-resolution of a domain. We want to know as soon as something changes, we want to make sure that we capture that data. So high level, we have just a count of all of our DNS records up here. This can be interesting sometimes when we start to look at that. But the next one down is kind of the really interesting one if we start to look at this. So one of the things we start to see here is this infrastructure variance. So not just kind of a raw count of how many A records or MX records do we have, but infrastructure variance is where we start to look at changes over the last 30 days. So in this case, we start to see that it's actually changed ASNs a couple of times in the last 30 days. It's rotated through a couple of IPs in the last 30 days. And interestingly enough, it's actually changed its name server a couple of times as well. Again, some of this can be explainable, especially if you're using any kind of like SaaS service for hosting. It may rotate through IPs a little bit more frequently. You may just have someone who's actually trying to hide also, or who just keeps getting shut down off of hosting providers. So infrastructure variance here actually is a really kind of interesting thing to look at, especially if you start looking at things like, automating and doing some hunting. There's a lot of really kind of neat little things you can pull out of that infrastructure variance section just to get an idea of like, what is going on with this domain. As you scroll down, bunch of fun things in here. So some of this is, we can start to see it is hosted on different providers here. One other neat little trick we can start to use, maybe you don't stare at ASNs all day long and you don't know 13.335 is Cloudflare, or you don't know some of the, GCPs or the Amazon ASNs that they have. A lot of times we want to start with just a very simple pivot. So I have a domain and I want to pivot off of, some of the IPs that I might be seeing. And in this case, even if we go back to the very beginning, we can see it was registered with Namecheap. There is this kind of gap here. We'll talk about this one in a second. You can probably guess where we're going to end up pivoting here, but then we can see fronted with Cloudflare, moved around a couple of times. So again, why we want to kind of have an understanding of that especially like the ASN changes, the diversity. When you see things like this, maybe you spun it up on Cloudflare, you got shut down, you had to move to a different provider. But one of the things you can do in here when you're starting to kind of look for, do I want to pivot on one of these IPs? Do I want to see if there was some shared infrastructure? One of the things that you can do is you can actually just click on an IP. This is going to bring up this kind of context menu. And we have this kind of little mini total view in here. So I'm picking, kind of one of the obvious ones, Cloudflare. here, but one of the things you can actually see is we actually pull up a count of IPs in here. So in this case, do I want to actually pivot on this IP? There's 8,800 A records resolving to this IP address. Maybe that's a good time on a Tuesday morning for you, but for me, that's a lot to look through. So maybe I skip that one. Maybe that's not the most exciting thing for me to actually look through right now. If I go back in time, I go a little earlier, maybe this Namecheap one could be interesting, but again, we start to see 58,000 A records. Parking page, not exactly the most interesting thing. Truthfully, we have this little bit of a gap here. So, when I always kind of look for fun new domains, this was the first thing that kind of stood out here. I want to know more about this guy. What is going on here? A little bit of context. This domain was associated with the Loki bot stealer. So, when I see things like this, it was just kind of pointing here for a little bit of time. Maybe this is where I kind of want to start looking. So I want to pull up my total view for this IP address. There's only 10 A records that we've seen. So great. I want to maybe pivot into this IP. I want to know a little bit more about what we're seeing. As we're going through, we find some more domains here. I'll spoil a little bit of the surprise because we only have 19 minutes. A lot of these domains, if you look them up in something like VirusTotal, these are all also associated with LokiBot, so great. We maybe found some infrastructure that they were potentially using here. We also have a really good jumping off point because now we have a couple of other domains. We have this dddotx.shop. We have some of these other ones, sebel.sbs. Not going to try to pronounce all these, but we have some other kind of top level domains we see them using. Now, we're on an IP address. One of the other interesting things is we have a total view for IPs. It's a little bit different. One of the things we can see here is actually no data available. This was tied to a bulletproof hosting provider that was just recently shut down. So in this case, there's not actually a ton of data because some of this isn't actually, there's no upstream here from this right now. So some of this actually doesn't have any information. Generally, if this wasn't something that was shut down, we'd have some information here. We'll look at another example, but one of the things I actually do want to start to look at in here as we're going through is some of these domains that we can maybe start to pivot on as well. So in this case, I want to look at this guy here, dddotx.shop. Same kind of thing, takes me to my total view. And we can start to see kind of similar sort of patterns in here, maybe kind of rotating through some infrastructure, ending up on this Amazon AES 14618 here. Same kind of idea that we can start to see, but rotating through some of these different providers. Now, as we're going through, promise we'll build up kind of the whole cluster here, but I want to go back to our original domain because one of the things that we want to start to actually look at is kind of total view. What are some of these other options in here that we can start to see? And in this case, there's a number of other things that we can actually start to look at in here. So one of the other things that we can start to use inside of our total view, we have our other kind of DNS records we're collecting. So quad A records for IPv6 we have in here. One of the other interesting ones is the name servers. So specifically what we actually have, we have kind of the history. We can see where it's rotating through name servers. Another neat little trick in here, we can look at Cloudflare name server pairs. So as part of your Cloudflare account, you get a certain set of name servers under your account. You can actually use this as a way to kind of start doing some pivoting on infrastructure because assuming you're setting everything up under one account, assuming you have the same pair of name servers assigned to you from Cloudflare from doing that, one really actually kind of neat little trick you can use in here is kind of pivoting off of this name server hash, which is just taking all of these, the current records at that given time, generating a hash for that and saying, what I want to do is I want to actually start to, I want to do the right thing here. I want to use, if I click on my hash, it brings up my context menu. I want to do a reverse lookup on this hash. So using this pair of name servers, I want to start to look this up. I want to do a reverse lookup. You can see it kind of populates things automatically for you here with that hash. There's ways you can kind of start to cut down on these records because we do have about 1,000 of them in here, which is, to be fair, a pretty good starting point. But we can even do something like last seen after relative, we'll say the last 21 days. Easy ways we can kind of cut this down. There's other kind of patterns. If we want to look for .shop, we want to look for CFD. There's other ways we can do this, but gives us a good way where, again, maybe if you are kind of hiding what you're doing, you're maybe using some of these CDNs to kind of hide your infrastructure. Neat little trick to pivot off of the name server pairs and kind of filtering down from there to see, what else can we maybe find that's associated with some of this infrastructure. The other ones, we actually did a whole webinar on this. Text records are a great one. Text records, we can do same kind of thing. We can do our reverse lookups from here. Again, a lot of these, if I want to look at something like the some of these SPF records, sometimes are maybe a little bit more specific. Sometimes we see IPs that are in here that we can kind of pivot off of. But again, good, easy little way that we can maybe start to find some other ways that we can kind of pull at some of these threads to see, what else can I start to find? So we have a lot of our DNS records in here. The other interesting one we have this domain-wide view. So if you haven't seen this, or if you've seen this and wondering why I haven't clicked on it, really all that does is it's just going to bring in all of our subdomains. So in this case, we can start to see, weirdly enough, they have a record set up for their MX records also, which is a neat little thing. A couple of the wwws that they have in there. No real other subdomains that we've discovered as part of this, but gives us a way when we do that domain-wide view, we can actually pull in kind of subdomains as well. If I look at my text records in here, it adds those in. So across all the records, it adds in any subdomains. So just more ways we can kind of start to pull in some of that data. We do also have, if it's a wildcard cert as part of our scanning, we do have that as well. So if I want to potentially pivot and say, find any IPs associated with, a given wildcard record for our certificate when we're doing our scanning, same kind of thing. We can pivot off of that. We can get more information around kind of infrastructure, what this looked like as we're going out and kind of collecting all of this data. So there's a lot of actual pivots in this total view, whether I want to go from a domain into an IP address, vice versa, I can go back and forth. Some of the other things that we do have inside of here that we use, we have the web search. Web search is a really good way that we can do some pivoting as well. There's about 150 fields that we actually collect as part of our scanning. So not just doing all that DNS resolution, but going out and actually doing all the scanning. So in this case, we can actually start to get a little bit of more information. So we can see as we were going out doing this scanning, the title, this is default server vhost. So maybe that explains why, where we had our one IP address with all those domains, just a bunch of virtual hosts, which is, probably what we would expect anyway, but we see where that was kind of staged and set up when we were, or when I say we, whoever was building a lot of these kind of C2 domains to call back to. The other interesting thing we can start to do is we can start to pivot on attributes like this as well. So again, now that I know we have these kind of .shop, these CFD or top level domains, an easy pivot I can do is actually using the content of the page. So we're not going to go through every single attribute. I think we've done sessions for that. But we do have hashes we generate for kind of the body of the page, JavaScript that loads on the page, the favicon. You can pivot off of the title, the HHV, which is kind of the headers of the server that are returned, JARM for fingerprinting TLS connections, certificate data. Kind of all of that content is available to actually pivot on. But we're going to stick with kind of the easy one. We do use SSDeep as well for kind of doing some fuzzy matching as well. In this case, we're just going to match off of that SSDeep hash um, because it does actually return a fair amount of infrastructure. Um, it's a very nice set of results also. So we can see some of these are actually ones we saw off of that IP address pivot. The Cella-IMS DDDOTX.shop shows up here. Um, we find a bunch of other kind of newer ones in here as well that start to appear. But the nice thing is when we do this, we can kind of use a bunch of these different tricks. So we can use some of the DNS history to do this pivoting. We can use some of the name server pairs, text records. Um, we can do a lot of that kind of reverse lookup to kind of get an idea. And then we can also use the kind of content of a page where um, originally I didn't actually think this was going to work, but they have this kind of very specific page that they created when they start building some of these panels to call back to. So in this case, I can use that content, that web scanner that we're using to go out and kind of find additional domains that kind of match some of that infrastructure and some of that content that we're seeing. So it really does give us, different ways we can kind of search through some of that data in total view. We can do some of this pivoting. And then if I want to, these are things that I can kind of save this search. If I want to come back and look for anything new that starts to match this, I want to find these domains, as early as possible. If I want to start maybe blocking some of these or just tracking infrastructure. Um, the other piece of this is what do we have? We have 8 minutes left. That's probably just enough time. So what we can also do is, as we're kind of going through and doing a bunch of these different lookups for, um, for these different domains and IPs, what I want to actually do is, let's do this instead, because I want to show this first. One of the things we can do, we had our original domain. We see it's montblancgroup.cfd. We talk a little bit about in some of the total view here, some of the ASN diversity, the IP diversity, name server changes. These are all things that we can actually start to search on as well. So if, for example, I don't want to maybe just check for any domain that's ends in CFD, or I want to go beyond some of that content searching. But I want to start to look a little bit more around kind of how this infrastructure is created. In this case, if I use my kind of original example, if I look at kind of the A records here, I can see, one of them is on this 14618 on Amazon. And I was bringing up the IP for a reason. Just pull this one up just so we can see some of the other domains again. If I look at some of these other ones where we found this kind of DDD OTX.shop, if I look at that in total view, same kind of thing. I can see it's 14618 that it's currently pointing to. Same kind of idea where I have my ns1.csof for the name server. Same thing that I'm seeing on this one. So maybe you've seen where we can go with this, but we can take a lot of these kind of attributes for how infrastructure is created and managed. These are actually things we can search across as well. So ideally, if I can find patterns like this, I can start to find infrastructure earlier. And there's different ways that we can actually start to do some of that searching. Some of the easiest things that we can do is like a whois search. So I can even say something like, I want to look for the domain ends with, we can do CFD. There's other ways we can do this. We can do a regex. There's also this really handy contains field. Contains is another really great trick because then I can do something like a wildcard. Sorry, not contains. One of. So I can do something like contains CFD. We also saw shop. I can take some of those items. I can take something like my name server here. So I have to say it contains csof.net. .net. Perfect. I can take a lot of these attributes. and I can start to do some of this searching. Admittedly, it's a little bit more of a kind of wider search. Um, but what you can actually do with this also, and this will be the last thing, and then we'll probably end it there, unless there are any questions. Um, One of the things you can actually do is you can actually start to go out and run a scan of these domains. So let's say, for example, I want to start to look at, oh, I don't know, we'll pick this one maybe looks interesting. Sella looks like they're trying to do something here. One of the last pivots you can make, you can do this in total view, you can do this as you're searching. You can go out and run a live scan. So we're always kind of doing all this scanning. These are scans that you can actually run also. Just as part of your regular kind of investigation, we can say, I want to go out, I want to run a scan. We have this simple scan you can run. You can run an advanced scan if you want to scan from certain regions or look like certain devices. But the nice thing is we can always kind of say, I want the latest view of this. I want to see, is there something here? What is this resolving to? So it just gives us a way we can kind of take some of that information. We can use this to do some simple pivoting as well in here. Or I can even just say, it looks like there's nothing there currently. Let me go back into my total view. I want to see kind of the web history for this. Looks like this one maybe isn't part of the cluster. I don't see any of the kind of like vhost patterns that we were seeing, but again, we can start with some of those kind of wider searches, do some of that scanning. This one actually looks kind of really weird, like someone messed something up for a while there. But we can do that scanning. You can always run live scans. You can do it again directly from total view, but it gives us a good way where we can just, if we want to say, I just want the latest and greatest information about a domain, we can go out and do that.